Welcome back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I am your host, Sean McKinda.
Ooh, kawaii ne.
And Nihon Nigatsu, I think I said that right.
You got it.
Hey, it only took a month and I finally did it. Is over, technically. I mean, it was technically over last week, but our editor was not feeling good earlier in the month and had to take a week off. God damn it. Damien fucking asshole.
Dirt dingus.
So we extended it a week last week, but then we also thought, hey, let's watch House. And we watched House.
And that's not House MD. That's just House.
It's just House, sometimes referred to as Houseu, because it is a Japanese movie from 1977 about a demonic house that eats people, but also about an old witch lady, but also about the atomic bomb, but also it's an episode of Scooby-Doo, but also it's a stream of consciousness bedtime story, but also it's a fantasy tale, but also it's kind of a Quentin Tarantino film, but also it's Evil Dead.
But also it's definitely Tim and Eric.
House is a lot of things, and it is the type of thing that is almost retroactively formative, I would say, to both Jackson and I. Like, this is the type of movie that had either one of us seen when we were younger, I feel like we would have a lot of thoughts about now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, I think there's still plenty to talk about here, but like, no, it's this whole vibe that this movie has going on. Like I think that there are. It's interesting because like a lot of the film is. I don't make the Tim and Eric comparison lightly. A lot of the film does feel like nonsense, but at the same time, it very obviously does have like themes and ideas on the brain. So I appreciated that about it too.
So we're going to come back to that kind of nonsense to it because I actually did some research this time and I watched, there's a 40-minute interview with the director Nobuhiko Obayashi. And it was really informative and really kind of helped explain some of what was going on with the film, because I think the film itself is very loose and experimental and strange and weird. And like, you can tell that it was made with ideas in mind, as Jackson has said, but like nailing down what those ideas are very hard to do in a lot of ways, because how a man turns into a pile of bananas at one point. What does that have to do with anything? I don't know.
Would you say this is kind of like Japanese Eraserhead? I was thinking about Eraserhead a lot.
That's not a bad comparison, honestly, because both Eraserhead and House kind of are elevated anxieties to the point of surrealism in a lot of ways. I think that's a very good way of putting it.
I mean, there's some key differences, most of them stylistic, because this movie, man, just one thing I gotta say, this movie is 70s as fuck.
Yeah, it is.
And I loved that. I've been thinking a lot about the 70s recently for some reason. Maybe it's because my mom's going through old photos. But yeah, this movie's 70s as fuck. And I feel like you know whether you want to watch it based on that statement alone.
Here's the litmus test. Do you want to watch Evil Dead 2 set in the 70s, made in Japan? If the answer is yes, you should watch House right now. If the answer is no, you should probably still watch House, honestly, because it's a movie that's hard to recommend, not because there's anything particularly reprehensible about it in any way, shape, or form, more so because it is just so fucking weird that it's kind of hard to explain. But it's a movie that I would still recommend to almost anyone anyway if they have the slightest interest in film.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it if you have the slightest interest in film, because I I enjoyed the movie for sure. I don't know if I loved it, but I liked it, and it definitely made an impression. I guess time will tell if like Eraserhead, like that was definitely a movie where I wasn't sure if I loved it, but like the more time has gone on, the more it's kind of stuck in the old noodle. So maybe this will be a similar situation. Maybe I will come to love it and want to rewatch it. So I definitely enjoyed myself. But I think that's probably a good way to put it. That like if you do consider yourself like a film person or a film buff, it's probably worth seeking out. Like your average layman though, like I mean, I can't imagine my mom or my aunt watching this and enjoying it very much. So.
No, I think that there is a certain type of person that you have to be. I mean, I think even beyond just like someone who likes film, I think if you were the type of person who watched like monster movies on a Saturday afternoon, this is a movie that you're going to enjoy as well. Like, I think that there is definitely a type of person that this movie is for beyond the film buff. But if you are a film buff, definitely seek it out. If you are the type of person who watches monster movies on Saturday afternoon, this is for you. If not, you're going to have thoughts about it. I think that there is an enjoyment to be had no matter who you are, but I feel like for a lot of people, it's going to turn more into something akin to The Room in a lot of ways. I'm going to make a comparison of this film to Velocipastor, and I'm going to back that up later. But Velocipastor is a very good comparison to it after watching the director interview, and I will explain why in a bit, because that is a statement that does not sound like it should be true.
I mean, I could already kind of see it, not knowing exactly where you're going. Like I could feel the energy there for sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, this movie was definitely interesting. And I think that also, if you're a degenerate weeb like I am, I think you'll appreciate it just because it's got that kind of that Katamari energy, like that.
Yeah, that's a good description too, honestly.
Yeah, there's sort of the like a little unfair, I think, meme of like, isn't Japanese media like so weird? And like, sometimes those comments dance a little too close to the sun for me in terms of like, kind of belittling another culture. But I think in this case, in Katamari and stuff like that, it definitely fits that archetype, and that happens to be an archetype I enjoy. So
no, I mean, I think that this and Katamari are the examples of isn't Japanese culture weird, but like in a very good way. Like this and Katamari are both glowing examples of strange culture that is absolutely wonderful. And America also has its own bits of just absolutely wild fucking culture that other countries are going to look at and be like, isn't America fucking wild? And some of that is going to be utterly wonderful, things that we love, but it looks absolutely bizarre to other people.
See, were you thinking when you said like American culture looking bizarre to other people, the first thing I thought of was Mark Wahlberg in Transformers 4 drinking the Bud Light in the street.
That's not a bad reference point, but I feel like if I was Japanese, I would be proud of other cultures looking at Katamari or House and thinking, that is weird and great, and I understand why people like it. If someone looked at me right now and said, the culture of Mark Wahlberg drinking a beer in Transformers 4, I would walk into the ocean.
No, you're completely right. Because, like, when we say something like House or Katamari is like, weird in a very particular cultural way, that brings to mind like, oh, like, isn't this very creative? Like, I wouldn't have thought of this. Whereas like Mark Wahlberg drinking the beer is, well, it's everything it appears to be on its face. It's a Michael Bay product placement moment.
We cannot compare Michael Bay to Kaita Takahashi. That is fucking infuriating. I hate that. Kaita Takahashi is a national goddamn treasure.
Can we argue? Because I'd say that House is very bold and brash, and that's one of the things I most appreciated about it. I'm gonna go on a side tangent here. Can we argue that in his own twisted way, Michael Bay is indeed bold and brash?
No. I mean, yes, you arguably can, but not in the way that I enjoy. I want this. This is what I think of when I think of Bold and Brash.
No, definitely not. Definitely not in this way. No, I am not saying that House is anything like a Michael Bay film.
Yeah, no, I don't want that to be conflated there. But I get the point that you're making. Just I'm unhappy by it.
Like I said, complete tangent. Let's get back to talking about an interesting movie and not Transformers: Age of Ultron.
That's you got it in one. So you mentioned that you're not sure how you're going to feel about this movie after you sit with it for a bit. And this is actually my second time watching House. The first time I watched it was back in probably October-ish.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Shit.
Yeah, you didn't know I've seen this before?
Because you had mentioned it to me before. It was like it was on my backlog list that you tell me about weird little movies occasionally, and I put them on there. So like it was on my list, so I knew you had talked to me about it, but I couldn't remember if you had actually watched it before or not.
Yeah. So this is my second time seeing House. I actually did watch it before, which is why when you suggested, I'm like, yeah, I'll do that again. Mostly because I still don't know how much I like this movie. But it's a movie that is such a vibe in a lot of ways. Like there's style over substance filmmaking. And I don't think that this movie doesn't have substance, but it has such a style to it that it is just, I think about it all the time. And like there are some shots in this movie that I just absolutely adore. The opening shot where the girl walks out of the photograph into the frame, like as it pans over, is something that I have been thinking about every day since I first watched this film, because it is such a wildly cool shot and I really, really like it and very much sets the mood for what's to come. But again, the actual content of the film is so fucking weird that I'm not fully sure where I fall on it. But it's a movie that if you said tomorrow, hey, Sean, let's watch House again, I will sit down and watch House again.
That's a very good way to put it.
It's a movie that I think that even if you don't know that you particularly like it, you're going to want to watch it again just because it is so wildly memorable and weird, and it's transfixing in its own way, just in its bizarreness and just how much it revels in what it is.
Yeah, and I think there are, like, because for me, I think what helped me just not, like, completely write the movie off is, like, style over substance. Like, oh, this is, bold and brash, which it is. But, like, because then there are those scenes, like, this is early on, so I wouldn't really consider this a spoiler, where Gorgeous, I think, is telling the backstory of her aunt whose house that they're going to, and like they splice in this World War II flashback, and there's like some speed ups and some stylistic stuff, and like really making all really emphasizing like this disjointed like oldness, and all the like main girls in the story are like not just commenting on what's happening. It's almost like it's weird the way that they comment on the footage is like they're watching it too, even if they don't say so explicitly.
I really like that. It's weird, but I like it.
It was one of my favorite scenes for sure, and it came pretty early on, so it really grabbed my attention. And I think that's one of those moments where like you get like the actual footage being shown is pretty straight faced. Like, you have the handsome young couple and like the widow after her fiance gets sent off to war and never comes back after he tragically gets drafted. And like they're kind of saying like all this like like teenage girl, like stereotypical, like kind of ditzy stuff. Like they're also saying like, oh, wow, like how spooky is that? Like as she's like weeping, like thinking about her husband who never came back, like stuff like that. And it's stuff like that that really gets your attention in addition to some of just the weirdo shit.
Well, I mean, you are leaving out the fact that scene literally culminates in an atomic bomb blast to which one of the girls commentates, "It looks like cotton candy," which if that is not the vibe of the entire movie, I genuinely don't know what is.
For sure. That is wonderful. And that it's one of the most like obviously pointed like theme moments, and yet it's also it's like disturbing in its dissonance in the way that like kids in horror movies often are, and that like a lot of what makes a kid in a horror movie sort of uncomfortable is like the way that they'll say stuff that, maybe should be unsaid, just sort of straight out. And that's one thing I also was really thinking about with this movie, is that like it is explicitly labeled like a horror comedy, and it is funny.
But here's the thing. It's actually, the director himself does not consider it a horror movie.
Oh, really?
Yes. The director himself considers it a ghost story fantasy.
That makes a lot of sense. So the horror movie is like a Criterion label, more or less.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just because that's the easiest category to put it in. I mean, like, describing something as a ghost story fantasy, having not seen this movie, you're just gonna be like, what the fuck are you trying to say? But like, it's ways to be like, it's a horror comedy, because people are like, oh, I get that, I understand what that means, I'll go watch it. And then, you watch and you're like, I see why people call it a horror comedy, even though it's kind of.
I think honestly, of the two labels, like it's easier to defend the horror label than the straight up comedy label. I think, like, you could argue that it's a comedy in the way that like Tim and Eric is, but a lot of it is like, and a part of this might be just like, cultural differences as to what constitutes like a joke, right? Like, part of what makes Dragon Ball a comedy in Japan is that like everyone's named after foods, and for some reason Toriyama thinks that's fucking hilarious, and apparently everyone else does too. Whereas we're just like, oh, isn't it weird that Vegeta's named like a vegetable man? So like, I'm sure part of it is just like cultural differences and like, what even constitutes like a joke or a comedy in the first place. But a lot of the movie, even considering that, does feel like just strange in a way that's like, haha, like uncomfortable laughter funny, more than like, haha, what a jape.
No, I think that's very fair. It's a very weird movie that horror comedy does not really do it justice for what it is. But again, it's hard to explain without using the phrase horror comedy, because that's the best shorthand we really have for it.
Yeah. And in that regard, like I did find it pretty disturbing in a lot of places, and also pretty funny in a lot of places. So.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the theme here in a minute. Is there anything you want to say before we get into spoilers?
I guess before we get into spoilers, like if we're thinking about, just to briefly return to like the horror comedy thing, because I was thinking about, in comparison, not so much Evil Dead, which is probably more apropos, but more like, when we say horror comedy, maybe it's just because we talked about it on the show, but I think about like Tucker and Dale, which like is a funny movie. It's a great comedy, and like it's very clearly playing with horror tropes. But I don't know if you could call that movie a horror movie in any sense of that word. Like, mostly it's just violent. and like, that's great. It's a fun movie, and I like what it does, but it's different. It's definitely different than this. And I think that lack of distinction that, we're going more into like ghost story territory, I think explains a lot of that. And it's a very interesting feeling, and not one that you maybe see as often as like straightforward horror comedy, the way that we conceive of it.
We talked about Cabin in the Woods as a bonus episode, so I'm kind of curious, like, how would you feel in a comparison to that movie instead of Tucker and Dale? Because I would argue that Tucker and Dale is a bit more slasher horror comedy, like that plays a little bit more into the Mike Myers of it all, and Cabin in the Woods plays more into the Evil Dead. Cabin in the Woods, I mean, obvious comparison there,
yeah,
but more of the supernatural, more ghost story of a horror comedy.
Cabin in the Woods is closer, I think. Like, it definitely is more explicitly a comedy with more explicit bits and, like, kind of weed-in, quippy dialogue. I do think there are parts of that movie that do try to be a little creepy, even in just like sort of the existential concept of being like tools, like bit parts for some greater power. I think that might be a little closer to this than Tucker and Dale, because yeah, I mean, it is a different sort. Like, I wouldn't say that Tucker and Dale's not like a horror comedy, because it's so clearly invested in like the horror slasher tropes, right? But like, I'm never at any point like freaked out by Tucker and Dale, aside from maybe a particularly gnarly bit of gore. But I guess that's just more the slasher thing, isn't it? So
yeah, no, for sure. As someone who is fairly invested in the genre of horror and exploring the different ideas behind it, Tucker and Dale is far more slasher horror, which is its entirely own thing as compared to the more horror existential monster thing going on, which is far more what I'm interested in. I think Halloween's a fine movie, but give me Hellraiser any day, which is all about existential weird monster stuff going on, and that's way more interesting to me, and that's way more what House is and Evil Dead to a lesser extent. So
sick.
Spoilers?
I'm good for spoilers.
Well, before we do, as always, please leave us a review on iTunes. Tell your friends about us. It's the only way we grow. Follow us on Twitter at BADH_cast. And next week, we're going to be...
He can't even say it.
We were just we've got stuff planned for the end of March that kind of picks up where we've been leaving things off, because we've had a kind of a theme interspersed throughout the past couple months that we're going to pick back up on. But we're like, we have a dead week next week. What should we talk about? We're going to talk about Doom from 2005 with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, because neither of us have seen it. And why not?
We just barely dodged the Snyder Cut, boys. Be thankful or be disappointed, however you're going to react.
So yes, we're talking about Doom next week, which is just a wild but very horse cast about face coming hot off the heels of a month of trying to watch like upper echelon art films and JoJo, and then Doom.
Listen, I would argue that JoJo is sufficiently bold and brash to be called art.
The court will not hear this argument at this juncture. Save it for the JoJo retrospective that is never happening. Spoilers, baby, let's go.
Here we go.
So, I want to talk about the theme again, because we touched on it briefly, but it's something that I kind of want to come back to, because it's worth mentioning that, as I said, the theme of the atomic bomb is very much throughout this entire film. Nobuhiko Obayashi is from Hiroshima, which is, definitely worth mentioning when you talk about the fact that this movie's about the atomic bomb and what that means for everything going in on it. And the movie, very early on, in that scene that Jax was talking about, that flashback kind of retrospective watch thing going on, the way the atomic bomb is presented is there's a camera flash and then the atomic bomb goes off. And that is the bomb. It's a flash and an explosion. It's a flash and death. It's a flash and, as Obayashi puts it, absurdity. Like there's death on that scale has essentially become absurd in a lot of ways. Like there's just no making sense of it. And so the movie from that point forward basically treats the cat eyes that flash right before a death as the flash of the atomic bomb before a death of just absurdity. Like the deaths are weird and they don't make sense and they just happen, much like the way the atomic bomb is. And like that is basically how the movie presents the theme of the atomic bomb, without actually presenting the theme of the atomic bomb, by just representing it as this absurd mass death and terror is just a flash away. And that's haunting as shit.
Yeah, that's a lot, and I think what's really cool is how that plays with sort of the, because there's the atomic bomb thread, but also the film is also very clearly concerned with like issues of like femininity, and that every single character seems to like they're sort of broad, like their names are pretty cartoony in that, like, you got Mac because she's the one that eats a lot, you got Melody because she plays the piano, and like you have all these sort of like caricatures, and the whole point of the movie is that old witchy ghost house lady is absorbing them, basically like eating them, and like there's something really, really like poetic there about like this gang of like ditzy caricatures that, like, we're slowly absorbing because, like, you know, they have something that we want or we need because our life was sad and miserable.
It very much shows the two sides of the atomic bomb, those who were impacted by it and for those who didn't see the consequences of it. And this is, again, something that the Obayashi brings up in this interview I watched, where it's not even so much of like an anger at the new generations that don't have the lived experience of dealing with an atomic bomb, as much as it is just a jealousy and enviousness that these kids get to be happy and free and don't have to live with the terror of the atomic bomb living over their head. They don't have that trauma that exists for an entire generation because they watched their friends die, as Obayashi did in Hiroshima.
Woo!
Yeah, this movie's a lot, which is kind of wild that it does manage to still be fun and absurd. And Obayashi genuinely seems like a pretty chill, fun dude from what I can tell. Like, watching this interview, it was very clear. And he even mentions, he's like, this movie was basically me making this movie with friends. He was super friendly with the people he got to play the roles of the girls. He actually did commercials and started to get to know these girls and basically said, hey, I'm going to make this movie. Come work on it with me. And like the people he brought on were his friends to make it. Like the composer is the watermelon dude from the at the stand. That's the dude who wrote all the music for it. His daughter is in the film. She is one of the two shoe shiners, along with one of the producers is the adult shoe shiner there. The teacher, Togo, is just one of his friends that he rode horses with. This is a movie, and this is where I get into that Jesus Christ Vampire Hunter or Velocipastor comparison. Now, this is a movie that was just made to make a movie. This was a movie that was very personal to Obayashi, but also he wanted to make a movie with his friends and have a good time doing it. And near as I can tell, he certainly did.
No, I mean, it sounds great because, like, on the one hand, like, we could talk about the heavy themes about, like, generational trauma and, like, you know, the national scarring of the atomic bomb and all that stuff. But
Speaking of which, I'm, like, 90% sure. I didn't actually look this up, but I'm, like, 99% sure that the man behind the camera of the atomic bomb right before that is the director, is Obayashi. They look almost exactly the same if it's not him. Hey, Editor Sean, just jumping in to clarify some things that I got wrong. The photographer is not Obayashi. It is Mitsutoshi Ishigami. Obayashi is in the film actually playing the husband who dies in World War II, which raises some questions, as I'm about to say, in regards to the photographer that could also be applied to the husband, such as loss of innocence and just a change in worldview. But that raises some other interesting questions just about like how he views himself within this world, because it's clearly a deliberate thing to put himself behind the flash that causes the atomic bomb. And that has some questions to it that I don't know that I necessarily feel comfortable answering, just because it would be entirely speculative. But it, you know, makes you think,
My gut reaction to hearing that is just like, this man probably had very strong feelings about Godzilla one way or the other.
Probably. And I think he talks about Godzilla too, because this is a Toho film, the same company that makes Godzilla. And he especially talked about it in regards to, if you watch this film, it looks very cheap. Like a lot of the special effects are very hammy, and like you can see the green screen, the editing out on it. And that's intentional, actually. Much like Jesus Christ Vampire Hunter, which leaned into its low budget, and Velocipastor that really leaned into its low budget. They had the resources of Toho to make this film, which was unheard of for a low budget film like this. In general, films like this got pushed off the Toho studio lot, but they just somehow managed to hang on there because Obayashi did a bunch of commercials for Toho, and they're like, yeah, go ahead and use the soundstage. So they had access to the special effects department of 1977 to do this. But he's like, no, we're going to get our own team to do it because we want to just exude that pleasure of filmmaking. We want people to know that people worked on this and made it a thing, and we want people to recognize that this was a labor of love, which is such a wonderful sentiment. This interview is so great. If you have a subscription to the Criterion Collection, absolutely take a 40 minutes and watch this interview with Obayashi. He is great. His daughter's in it. His screenwriter's in it. It's so interesting.
I mean, it sounds like a real delight, and like I really do appreciate it. Like I was thinking the whole time, because there's like, a lot of shots that are obvious, like Reading Rainbow, like matte paintings, but I was thrilled by that. I was like, yeah, hell yeah. I mean, it's part of the 70s as fuck vibe, and that it feels kind of like the drug trip scene from Easy Rider, but the entire movie.
Yeah. And I mean, I fucking love matte paintings in films.
Yes.
More of them, always, please. I don't care that it's 2021 and we can CGI a backdrop. A matte painting looks so fucking good. I think about Night of the Comet and the way that movie used matte paintings all the goddamn time. So fucking good. I forgot
we did Night of the Comet on this show. What a legend.
Yeah, that's a great movie too. That was a bonus episode, which you can't really access right now. I might release that one just because that is such a fucking great movie and a great episode that y'all should go watch. So another bonus recommendation for you.
Hell yeah. I mean, it bears repeating that, like, in addition to all these heavy themes and the joy of filmmaking, like, not just in, like, you can interpret me saying, oh, I delighted in, like, the 70s-ness of it all and, like, the cheesy special effects and stuff as, like, me dunking on the movie. But to be clear, this is also a movie where a girl known only as Kung Fu spends half the movie getting like the house is trying to kill her, but she goes Ultra Instinct on it and just won't allow it. And in her dying moment, her leg detaches from the rest of her body. It's getting absorbed into a lamp, and it yeets itself into the evil cat painting, which, like, I mean, probably made the situation worse because the last girl just has to, like, go into death's, like, loving embrace as she rides a raft atop a pool of blood. But this is also a movie where there's a girl named Kung Fu who detaches her leg to yeet herself in a cat painting, and that's wonderful.
So this movie is definitely an inspiration for Quentin Tarantino, though, right?
It has to be. This is exactly the sort of, like, obscure, or at least at the time when he would have been watching this stuff, like, trashy thing that is like, oh yeah, I could feel it.
I mean, it's got the stinger for Kung Fu, kind of like Kill Bill in that moment, like that thing going on there every time. He's got, like, the broad characters that, like, still have personality and identifying features to them, just named by, like, the Bride or Gorgeous. Like, this, if this is not an influence in Quentin Tarantino, I will be fucking shocked. It is so Quentin Tarantino.
Quentin Tarantino has probably seen every, like, trashy 70s movie there's ever been, so I'm sure that it was. It must have also been an influence on whoever designed Castlevania, because when Mac comes out of the well, I think she flies literally in the Medusa head pattern.
I do think, though, that is an actual thing of Japanese folklore. It might not be Japanese, but I know that there are cultures where, like, legitimately a head of a woman will come off of the body and, like, fly and eat things. I know a decent weird amount about weird cultural folklore because I think it's utterly fascinating, and it might be a South American thing, actually. Like, I feel like it was Brazil-ish that has this creature. Editor Sean jumping in to say that while I was correct that this is a creature of folklore, I was way off in the location. It's known as a penanglan or a penagal. I guarantee I have butchered the pronunciation on that, and I apologize. But it is a cryptid known in Southeast Asia, such as Cambodia, Philippines, West Sumatra, places like that. But yeah, I mean, I could see that taking from there, or I could see Castlevania taking it from there. I mean, listen, this movie also influenced so fucking much of, like, the N64 era, right?
It had strong N64 PS1 vibe.
Even beyond that, it had the piano that attacked, a la Mario 64. Like, that was a big one. And if this movie didn't create the toilet paper thing from Legend of Zelda, I don't know what did.
No, you're totally right. Someone at Nintendo EAD back in the day loved this movie. I bet your bottom dollar.
Yeah, like I texted Jackson, like, count the video game references that are in this movie, because, or not even references, things that informed these video games that you love, and you'll be shocked, because there are a number of things that clearly somebody just loved from this movie and put into an N64 video game.
You know, it's funny, like, because like you did when I went into the movie, like I was ready to be super on the lookout for that stuff, but I think it was just a testament to like how enjoyable and how much I was like engaging the movie kind of on its own terms that I sort of forgot to do that after a while.
The first time I did catch the piano, I'm like, oh, that's very Mario 64. I bet that was kind of an influential thing for that. But I totally missed the toilet paper thing, where, to be clear, if this is nonsense to you, because it's entirely possible that you have never had this experience in Legend of Zelda, even playing Legend of Zelda, because it's always late in a weird side quest chain thing you've got going on and never required. It's in Majora's Mask or Ocarina, right?
It's definitely a Majora's Mask. I don't know if it showed up any earlier than that. I think the first time it showed up was in Majora's Mask.
In at least a few Zelda games, because I also know it's in Skyward Sword. I'm sorry, Jackson.
No, I remember I was really mad about that too, because I'm like, how dare you use this side quest, you piece of shit game.
There is a hand that reaches out of like a creepy hole and like beckons for you. And then you get close, it's like, paper, I need toilet paper. And in this movie, at one point, one of the characters sticks their hands out of a door and like beckons at them, and you think it's just this weird disembodied hand, just like in Zelda. And they're like, paper, toilet paper, please. And you're like, oh, that's where that came from. And it definitely came from this.
It 100% did.
Which I get. I think like explaining all of this, it really explains why I think this would have been an incredibly formative movie for Jackson. And I think just like the fact that we have barely even touched on the fact that this movie is just Japanese Evil Dead is what would have made it so formative for me, because Evil Dead is a formative movie for me. But this movie is just Evil Dead. And I, honest to God, I have a suspicion that these things just kind of happened independently of one another, because looking into it, it doesn't seem like there was actually a US release of House until very recently, until basically Criterion brought it to the States. Like it was well known in circles, but like, I don't know whether Sam Raimi would have seen this movie beforehand, despite the fact that there was a lot of parallels. There was a 4-year gap between when House was released and Evil Dead was released, so it's entirely possible. But like, that's a small enough window too that I could just see these two things happening kind of on their own way.
And well, because both this and Evil Dead have kind of the indie low budget spirit, which might be sort of the main thing that connects them, regardless of whether or not they like shared actual inspiration, which I think is possible. Like I could definitely see. I mean, I talked to one of my friends who's slightly older than me about like the good old days of when you had to go to like flea markets and swap like fan sub tapes to watch anime. So I could totally see Sam Raimi, you know, being exactly the sort of like indie weirdo to like go to a flea market and look for, you know, low budget like bootleg horror VHS copies of House, probably untranslated, and being like, this is the best thing I've ever seen in my entire fucking life.
Entirely. I'm not here to I'm not here to discount that for sure.
No, but either way, like I think that, you know, whether it's intentional influence or no, like, you know, this is the proud Joestar spirit of independent film, of just like, we're gonna make, you know, this cheap little garbage thing, and we're gonna have the time of our life doing it, and hopefully you have the time of your life watching it. And that's you know, we talked about that several times on the show, and it's a beautiful thing every time.
I would like to stress too that like cheap little garbage thing, but like is incredibly personal is
Yes.
what really makes it. And like to call it garbage is very much from us a term of endearment. Like
Yes.
we dismiss things as garbage, but we also are like, this is a cheap, B film that was put together through just pure passion and love and got made and is absolutely wonderful for it.
When I call something garbage, when I call House garbage, or when I call Velocipastor garbage, it has a very different meaning than when I call Transformers garbage.
Yeah, no, entirely. I want to make that abundantly clear because I don't, as much as I said, I still don't really know how I feel about House. I love it despite the fact that I don't know that I like it, if that makes sense.
No, I totally get it. I totally understand. And I think if you watch the movie, you will totally understand that sentiment too.
Yeah, it's a very weird thing. I also really quick because I think that this is worth mentioning as well is that there is a surprising amount of nudity in this film, which I was really like kind of expecting to be made uncomfortable by because I'm like, ooh, you know, the 70s and there's supposed to be young girl nudity and whatnot. But even throughout it is very tasteful in a lot of ways. Like it never really feels like it's there for sexuality. It feels far more like it's there just because it was there at the moment. It was incidental. The one part that you could make an argument for is a little bit more sexual is when the one girl falls into the lake of blood and dissolves. I think that you could make an argument either way on that one, and I am entirely receptive to either interpretation of it. But I think that there is still just like enough love throughout the film that it feels far more incidental and not like leeringly like, ooh, look at this, you know, nude woman in this film that you might expect of the era. And I actually have a theory as to why that is.
See, it's funny because my gut reaction is actually that something from like the 60s or 70s, if it does have nudity, I mean, not blanketly, because there definitely are like trashy exploitation films that are more about that, but like, especially I think because I definitely had a moment like, oh, are we going here? And then very similarly was like, oh, okay. I mean, yeah, it's that kind of thing. And I actually thought of it as like, oh, this is like 70s nudity. But I think part of that is also like there is definitely different cultural standards where like nudity isn't necessarily like meant to be sexual. Like in Earthbound, for example, this is my go-to, that in the Japanese version of the Magic Hand sequence, Ness is naked, but in the American version of that sequence, he's in his pajamas like at the beginning of the game. And like in early Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, they probably censor this nowadays because, you know, standards have changed to be more aligned with like American broadcasting standards. But like you would be surprised how America indeed. But yeah, you would be surprised how often you see Goku and Gohan's like little baby penis in Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. Like it's in like every other episode at the beginning of the original Dragon Ball, and it's not really like, it's not meant to be titillating. Like we're not supposed to be like, ooh, Goku, because he's like, you know, looks like a 5-year-old.
Sam was actually pointing out that we had a conversation about this in the JoJo Part 3 episode, actually, because she's going back and listening to them after having watched Part 5, and I think she's just kind of like morbidly curious now.
Oh no.
So we've had this conversation before, I can confirm. But it is worth mentioning. Like, I think you're entirely right.
Dragon Ball is always my go-to example because, I think it's surprising because, like, Dragon Ball is also popular here, and, like, I'm sure in the original broadcast of the dubs, like, you know, those scenes got cut out. But, like, yeah, it's not like, you know, you watch Dragon Ball and that's considered, like, child pornography or anything, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that very much applies here, too. Like, there's nothing about any of the gazes that feel particularly lecherous or, like, it doesn't even feel very male-gazy. I looked up the director originally because I'm like, is this a female director, especially given how much of this movie is very female-centric focused, like, and none of the characters are written in a way that are particularly disrespectful to women, you know? It's dated in a lot of ways and it's culturally different from America, so keep that in mind as I'm saying these things. But like, even with that in mind, I was never like, ooh, that was icky by 2021 standards. It was mostly like, yeah, all right.
Yeah, they're broad and like archetypal.
Well, they are women.
They are women. Ah!
because broad women, broad's a derogatory term.
That was a good one. I'm not gonna lie. I like that. So they definitely are more like archetypes, but I think that like it becomes clear pretty quickly that like that's something that's like worth remarking upon. And also it's not like it doesn't have that, if we are talking about slashers, I know that one component of at least certain slashers is sort of the mean spirited, like, oh, like, we're gonna cut down like all these like, dumb teenagers. Like it doesn't feel like that. Like even if the characters are a little ditzy, it doesn't feel like we're supposed to be like relishing in them getting swallowed by this eldritch house.
And I have an idea as to why that is and why these characters are treated with respect.
Give it to me.
Every, or at least a lot of the deaths in this movie come from Obayashi asking his daughter what she thinks is scary.
I did read that actually. Yep.
And so a lot of them are her being like, oh, I went to my grandparents' house and I was thinking about like pulling up a watermelon out of a well, and what if it was a head instead? Or like, what if your reflection attacked you? Or this clock is scary. What if I got caught in this clock? Which, speaking of which, I wonder if that helped inspire Clock Tower. I don't know. Just another video game thing that I could see being inspired by this, because who fucking knows? Although there's no scissorman in this one, so hard to say. But like it becomes very clear that he is putting his daughter in a lot of these roles, if not intentionally, then, just through the nature of she is the one who gave us the suggestion. It's my daughter. I want her to live. I want to respect her. I want to care about her, which I think is just utterly fascinating in that regard, and like really kind of helped explain why these scenes might not have been so sexual in my eyes. And like I wasn't even considering the cultural or time differences at the time, just mostly why this? Why did this escape that gaze?
Yeah, no, because I actually was also wondering if this movie was directed by a woman for that reason. And yeah, I mean, little touches like that, just getting someone's genuine input, goes a long way.
Yeah. He actually asked her because he was like, adults are very much ingrained in what they know, watching movies. And this actually was a response to Jaws in a lot a ways, which I think is deeply fascinating because it's a very different movie.
Yeah,
but
weird.
The Japanese movie market wanted a Japanese Jaws, and he's like, I'll make House. And they said, go ahead. The Japanese equivalent to Jaws, I suppose. You'd expect like a Godzilla or something, and no.
Yeah, that's so... I love that so much.
Yeah, it's fucking great. But yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting in that way. I had something I was going there and I lost my train of thought, so never mind.
With this movie, there's a lot of stuff that you can go into. Like I forgot how prominent because kind of the inciting incident is like the dad daughter like relationship, and it's easy to see, like, even though the dad himself never really comes back, like that does end up informing. Would you even consider Gorgeous like the main girl? I don't know if I would, because after a while, Fantasy kind of becomes like our implicit like POV character, is the only one who like recognizes that shit's really fucked here and keeps...
That's because the fucking witch is gaslighting her.
Yeah, but that's still interesting to me, and that we have Gorgeous as sort of our go-to protagonist, and she sort of gets absorbed into the witch collective about halfway through, and then by that time, though, the witch has been toying with Fantasy. I don't know, weird, interesting stuff as far as like point of view and like who we're supposed to identify and sympathize with. I don't know.
I would argue that like the main character is honestly the house. Like I think that's really what it boils down to. Like I think that everything else is just, Gorgeous and Togo and Fantasy and all that other stuff is just a reason to get there. And then the main character is the house. The protagonist is the house more than anything. And there's no change or arc or anything, but the focus is on that.
Togo gets bananaed before he can even get there.
Togo gets bananaed. I thought, for a minute there, I very much went, this is just a YouTube poop. As Togo is sitting there patting his head and going, banana, 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 banana. Like fucking, he was being rewound and replayed time and time again. It's a weird fucking movie.
I was thinking of the popcorn scene from Troll 2.
There's a lot of, it's a weird, yep.
and not just because he turns into food, but also because there's this weird, like, psychosexual element to him turning into food as well.
Yeah. Yep.
Actually, I like popcorn. Well, no problem. All we have to do is heat it up.
Last question for you that I have on my list of things that I'm kind of going through that I took notes on this interview and things that I wanted to talk about. But this is just a little smaller thing. As another thing that might be an influential bit. Did you notice that the song, like the main overture, sounds a lot like the opening to Black Parade by My Chemical Romance?
I did not, only because I'm stupid and would not be able to identify Black Parade by name. I'm sure I'd know it if I heard it, but I know nothing about music.
It's that... versus houses.
Yes. But the song definitely did sound familiar. I couldn't put my finger on what it was because I'm music dumb. But
to be clear, I'm definitely going to edit myself out going ding, ding, ding and actually put in the opening to Black Parade and the song from House, because that will make sense to people, and me going ding, ding, ding will definitely not. I am tone deaf when I open my mouth. So,
I mean, I understood which one you were talking about.
Well, I'm happy that you at least got the point. I'm going to make it a better listening experience for our audience. Maybe I'll slap it at the end. Audience, stick around to the end and you can hear me going ding, ding, ding.
But yeah, no, I was trying to put, because the music did stand out to me for some reason that, like, I couldn't grasp the true form of why, though. So it's interesting that you made that parallel.
It is one note different from the Black Parade opening. Like the opening of the Black Parade drops like a step between the first and second note, and this stays the same between the first and second note. And like that is the only difference of like the first 8 or so notes of both songs.
Well, howdy.
Also, fun fact about it, the Obayashi really wanted the music to stand out of this piece, which I think is why we both noticed it so much more. Like the composer was like, I don't want to do this because it's just gonna like follow the background. And Obayashi's like, no, all the best ghost stories all have like haunting melodies that stand out from everything else, and the melody is the most important part of any movie. And the dude's like, yeah, okay. I mean, Obayashi was just very good at making sure that everyone who is working on the film felt like they were the most important person on the film, which is very important to do when you are directing. And also when you're playing D&D, as I am learning a lot, you have to make sure everyone is happy and everyone feels like they're the most important person.
What a Chad. What a director.
High, mad respect for Obayashi. He seems like a really cool dude. And I definitely am going to go check out some of his other movies. Do we have anything else left to say about House?
No, I think we've hit most of the major stuff that at least I was thinking about, so...
Watch House. I really highly recommend it, especially if you've sat through all of this conversation. You still are missing huge swaths of what makes House so special. We cannot adequately explain the visuals of this movie, which are so fucking wild.
Yeah, it's the kind of movie where, like, no amount of spoiler discussion. We could be here for another 2 hours and talking about every single bit, but, like, you won't really appreciate it until your eyeballs have been assaulted by the 70s.
We didn't even talk about the dancing skeleton. Get ready for a dancing skeleton. It's great.
My man Hans Bones Cortez. That's the name of every skeleton in my mind.
Well, I am Sean McKinda with the Hans Bones Cortez inside me. You can find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda. Yeah, that's what I got going on.
And I'm Jackson Keller. You can find me and my internal Hans Bones Cortez at Jackson J. Keller on Twitter, as well as Twitch. Not on YouTube, though. On YouTube, I'm just Jackson Keller, but you should go check that out because in addition to uploading little Horsecast, we upload the Horsecast there. I also have been doing creative writing seminars. This week, by the time this episode goes up, you should have the edited down version of last week's lesson, which is about what makes for a compelling protagonist and some protagonist myth busting as well. It was a good time. So check that out. Peep that shit. Like, comment, subscribe, please. Get that interactions up. I need viewers. I'm trying to sell a book here.
Follow the podcast on Twitter at BADH_cast. We tweet about episodes going live and also retweet when Jackson puts out episodes and stuff like that. So check that out. We have a Patreon, patreon.com/BADHcast. It is paused currently. I have no idea what you can do with it while it's paused. You might be able to get stuff in there. You might not. Who fucking knows? But you can go check it out. As always, thanks to those that have used our theme song is Suicide, alternate take off the album High Octane, Low Expectations. They're a wonderful band. You should go check them out wherever you can. Stream their music, buy their music, support them on Bandcamp. Whatever you can do to support them, please do so. Also, go support 25 Years Later site.com. It's a wonderful site full of a bunch of really talented people doing a bunch of really talented writing. There's a little button of us in the corner that you can absolutely click on, but you should definitely stick around and read some of the stuff that they got going on over there. Next week, I was almost going to say we're going to watch Transformers 4. Thank God we're not. We are watching Doom, which I suppose is only marginally better.
I mean, we'll find out if it's better or worse if The Rock drinks a Bud Light on camera for us.
If he doesn't, we riot. Bye.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go into the grave.
It's that ding, 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 ding.